One of the more insidious theories that every so often leaks its way into our consciousness is the idea that politicians and celebrities, the elite if you will, are consuming the blood of children. An even more grotesque version of this accusation exists, where some go as far as to declare that the elite are eating babies, either out of some monstrous cannibalistic desire, or, according to more recent theories, because young blood rejuvenates the consumer. Whilst there is pretty much no concrete science or evidence to prove that anyone is actually doing this, or that it actually works, there are those who use the seemingly impossible youthfulness of some of Hollywood's older stars in order to justify such a claim. According to this claim, having clear, wrinkleless skin isn't a case of genetics, or in many of these cases, surgery, but in actuality, a clear-cut sign that you've probably been guzzling your fair share of infant blood cocktails. Where did this idea come from? Seemingly from thin air. But in fact, the argument of cults or groups drinking the blood of the youth does have some historical, if not anti-Semitic roots. One of the most infamous examples is the blood libel, a medieval claim that Jewish communities kidnapped Christian children for ritualistic purposes involving their blood. Despite having no tangible basis, this belief led to widespread fear, persecution, and violence, where many Jews were blamed and punished whenever Christian children disappeared or turned up dead. In recent years, a resurgence of blood drinking has reintroduced this age-old myth in a new form, and the blood libel has found unexpected connections to modern Hollywood figures and celebrities. The most prominent of these modern myths is the Adrenochrome conspiracy, which alleges that powerful elites, including well-known actors, musicians, and political figures, are part of a secret cabal that harvests the adrenal glands of children to extract a chemical known as adrenochrome. This conspiracy theory claims that adrenochrome has rejuvenating or life-extending properties, and that members of this elite group engage in horrific rituals, often linked to human trafficking or abuse, to obtain it. One theory makes an effort to connect this with the amount of children who have disappeared over the years, that they have somehow been swiped off the street, fed into a system where their blood is extracted and then discarded under the veil of secrecy by some Illuminati-esque organization. Of course, none of these theories can actually be substantiated, and there's no real reason to assume that celebrities and the elite are using adrenochrome from the blood of children, although some of them are definitely doing some messed up stuff. As already mentioned, one of the biggest theories targets the fact that some celebrities don't appear to age, and that this is because these celebrities have partaken in these kind of blood libel rituals. The problem with the argument is that it does not factor in other possibilities that some might say are more likely to be the cause of this youthful immortality. Celebrities usually have more money than the average person, and so it's likely they have access to far better skin routines. It's also true that plastic surgery is pretty common amongst these kinds of people, and because of their line of work, it's natural that they would gravitate towards such procedures that enable them to look as young as possible. Another idea against the adrenochrome claim is that certain celebrities might just have better genetics than your average Joe. It's how many of them got famous in the first place, particularly those who are physically attractive. One interesting theory I've read, which some took as absolute proof that celebrities were drinking the blood of the youth, transpired during the pandemic. Supposedly, many celebrities who were filmed in and around their mansions during lockdown were said to look disheveled, unkempt, or just downright drained. It's probable that this was because they didn't have their team of makeup artists to make them look youthful and great. But some deduced that this was because they were cut off from their supply of blood due to the lockdown restrictions, and thus their bodies were now once again succumbing to age. How true could such theories be? Well, such claims of people drinking the blood of the youth goes further back than you might have imagined. In retrospect, we can see that many of those accounts were either falsified, embellished, or just downright applied in order to justify a growing anti-Semitic rhetoric. Historians agree that cases of blood libel were most definitely a form of weaponized propaganda, where such accusations against Jewish communities, similar to witchcraft in the 16th and 17th centuries, allowed for certain paranoia and hysteria, especially during a time when the Church, and particularly the Crusades, were fueled by anti-Judaic narratives. As for celebrities drinking infant blood, well, it's nothing we can actually prove, but who knows what these rich psychopaths are doing. In any case, the very first instances of people drinking the blood of children has nothing to do with adrenochrome per se. The first allegations having sprung up as early as the 12th century, not even doctors at the time would have known what adrenochrome was, much less the supposed properties. Nonetheless, much of the superstition around the drinking of blood was still quite prominent, stemming from the likes of Greek philosopher Democritus, who would incriminate Jewish people as being involved in such a morbid practice, saying, every 7 years the Jews captured a stranger, brought him to the temple in Jerusalem, and sacrificed him, cutting his flesh into bits. Such discourse on Jews was echoed by Hellenized Egyptian grammarian Appian, who claimed that every year the Jews would capture a Greek and sacrifice him in their temple. Afterwards they would eat his flesh, and condemn the Greeks in the process. These claims were not isolated, but rather started cropping up by other influential Greek writers in and around the 1st and 2nd centuries. By the 5th century, Socrates of Constantinople had his own rather brutal account that Jews had bound a Christian child to a cross in mockery of Christ's crucifixion, where the boy was whipped to death. By the 12th century, this damaging stigma associated with Jewish communities was only further propagated when the Church Council mandated a segregation of Christians and Jews across Europe. A level of distrust brewed between both communities, and so it wasn't long before old superstitions and accusations would return, pitting both groups against each other. Before long, it was whispered that blood libel was something the Jews were practicing, and that they were using the blood of children, especially Christian children, as an ingredient in baking matzah, unleavened bread eaten during Passover. Some began to believe that the cups of wine drunk by Jews during Passover were actually cups of child's blood, or that blood was mixed into sweet pastries for consumption during the Jewish holiday of Purim. Whilst the modern take on blood libel suggests that the blood is consumed in an effort to achieve youth, accusers at the time of the 12th century claimed that young Christian blood was used as medication and even as aphrodisiacs. The first ritualistic murder, or at least the murder that really snowballed these sorts of accusations in the 12th century, took place in Norwich, England. The legend has it that a boy named William was found dead in the woods somewhere just outside of the town. Now this transpired during a particular time of civil unrest. The grandchildren of William the Conqueror, Stephen and Matilda, were at war with each other, and the area of East Anglia where Norwich is located was a place of considerable bloodshed. Bodies were hanged from trees, buildings were wantonly burned by bandits, a rumoured kidnapping ring was also in operation. All in all, it wasn't that uncommon to stumble upon the dead body of a child. The boy, William, whose surname is lost to history, would become dubbed simply as William of Norwich. Indeed, there were a lot of bodies rotting in the woods at that time of English history, but something about William of Norwich stuck with certain people. With the explanation of his death ultimately unresolved, what came instead were dangerous sentiments of hearsay, prejudice and conspiracy, those that would fester anti-Semitic thoughts and feelings amongst the local Christian community. It is unknown exactly what people thought about William of Norwich upon discovering his body. It's entirely possible that they thought nothing at all, considering the circumstances of war unfolding around them. We can't even know for sure if they instinctively blamed the Jews for what was apparently a murder. Instead, this blame came about many years later, when a monk by the name of Thomas of Monmouth wrote a treatise known as The Life and Passion of William of Norwich. It's clear that Thomas of Monmouth did not know William of Norwich. He wasn't even living in Norwich when William was alive, but yet he still wrote this treatise in an effort to establish him as a patron of the city, and to probably further his own career in the process. The treatise itself is not a factual account of William's life, and was probably constructed with a lot of hearsay and bias, that which only fueled the fires of the later anti-Semitism that was set to take place. Thomas of Monmouth tells us that William was a tanner's apprentice, but that he was approached one day by a messenger and hired to work as a cook for their local archdeacon. His mother, suspicious of these Jewish members of the community, refused, but after some promises that this could be a lucrative endeavour, she agreed. Thomas of Monmouth writes here that during one account, when Passover was celebrated, the Jews kidnapped William and tortured him. They shaved his head and pricked him with thorns, and just like with Socrates' account some 1,000 years prior, they made a mockery of Christ by making William imitate Christ's passion. From these wounds that were incurred, his blood was said to have been drained. They bound his foot with chains, pierced his sides, and then doused him with boiling hot water. After a few days, they hanged his body in the woods, where it was later found and buried by passers-by. Thomas of Monmouth tells us that when his mother heard of his death, she immediately accused the Jewish community, but no one really believed her. Supposedly, according to Thomas of Monmouth, the local priest attempted to trial the accused Jews, but the sheriff, John de Chesney, came to their defense, who Thomas later tells us was paid off by the Jews to keep their crime a secret. None of this can actually be confirmed as historical fact, because Thomas of Monmouth's treatise is the only written account we have in regards to the death of William of Norwich. Realistically, it's more than likely the case that Thomas of Monmouth was essentially flogging a dead horse, doing his best to infuse some interest and relevance around William of Norwich, but ultimately failing to do so. What Thomas of Monmouth's account did do, however, was generate feelings of suspicion and collusion, particularly between the likes of the authorities, such as the Sheriff John de Chesney and the Jewish nobles, who were uncharacteristically protected during the accusations. Indeed, after Thomas of Monmouth's version of William's death began to circulate, several other unsolved child murders started to crop up, all of which were linked to Jewish conspiracy. Cases like Harold of Gloucester and Robert of Bury bore eerie similarity to that of William of Norwich, where two boys were inexplicably murdered in what was believed to have been a ritualistic sacrifice. One of the more famous accounts involved little St. Hugh of Lincoln, a child who in the mid-20th century was murdered and dumped in a well. What had started as unexplained murders had in the space of 100 years become twisted and warped into a false rhetoric that Jewish communities were abducting, torturing, and murdering Christian children. Such attitudes would lend to the already boiling tensions between the Christians and the Jews, and by the end of the 12th century, widespread attacks began to transpire against the Jewish population, leading to massacres at London and York. As for the unease at Norwich, many Jews were killed in their homes as a result of the peasant revolt that transpired in 1190. Hostilities against Jewish communities continued all the way through most of the 13th century, where Edward I ordered the expulsion of Jews from England. The enduring legacy of blood libel from its medieval origins illustrates how deeply ingrained fears and superstitions can nearly ruin an entire people. Historically, blood libel fueled violence and persecution against the Jewish communities, reflecting the intolerance of one group towards another, as well as showing us quite vividly how brutal the toll of superstition and prejudice can be if left unchecked. Historians agree that many, if not all, the children mentioned in today's episode were more than likely scapegoated as a means to advance anti-Semitism, and were certainly exemplary of the early Christian dogmatism and suspicion. Ironically, blood libel is in direct conflict with Jewish traditions, for as told in the book of Leviticus, blood cannot be consumed, not even the blood of animals, whereby animals must be drained first in order for the meat to be considered kosher. Let me know your thoughts from the blood libel superstition from history, and what you think about the accusations our celebrities and elites receive in regards to this old dark practice. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.